The moment I heard Master Caldwell say he was going to sell me away from my wife and children, I knew I had only one choice. I had to disappear into the very walls of the house I had built with my own hands. My name is Marcus, and I am 26 years old. For 7 days in the summer of 1857, I lived like a ghost in the spaces between the walls of the Caldwell mansion in Augusta, Georgia, invisible, silent, listening to secrets that would eventually buy my family's freedom and destroy the man who thought he owned us. But to understand how I did it and why it worked, you need to understand who I was, what I knew, and how the house itself became my weapon against the man who believed he could control every aspect of my life. I was born into slavery in 1831 on a cotton plantation about 15 miles outside Augusta, Georgia. The plantation belonged to a man named Colonel Harrison, who owned 200 enslaved people and 3,000 acres of land that stretched from the Savannah River to the pine forests that marked the edge of his property. My mother was a house servant named Rebecca, a woman of quiet dignity who worked in the big house cooking and cleaning and caring for the Colonel's children. My father was a field hand named Joseph, a strong man with gentle eyes who worked from sunup to sundown in the cotton fields that made Colonel Harrison wealthy. I have only a few memories of my father. He died when I was 5 years old, crushed under a wagon wheel in an accident that happened during harvest season. The wagon was overloaded with cotton, the wheel broke, and my father was underneath trying to fix it when the whole thing collapsed on him. He died instantly, they said, though I've always wondered if that was true or if he suffered before the end. No one investigated the accident because enslaved lives weren't worth the trouble of an investigation, weren't worth the time it would take to determine if someone had been negligent or if the equipment had been poorly maintained. My father was simply gone, and my mother and I were left to grieve alone. My mother raised me by herself after that, working long hours in the big house, and then coming back to our cabin at night to care for me, to teach me, to prepare me for a life that she knew would be hard and dangerous and full of injustice. She was an unusual woman in many ways. She had been taught to read by the Colonel's mother, an old woman who had believed that all people, regardless of color, should know how to read the Bible. This was illegal in Georgia, where teaching enslaved people to read was punishable by fine or imprisonment. But the old woman had done it anyway, in secret, before she died. My mother passed this dangerous gift on to me. Late at night, after the work was done and the overseers were asleep, she would trace letters in the dirt floor of our cabin by candlelight, teaching me the alphabet, teaching me to sound out words, teaching me to read from a tattered Bible she had hidden under the floorboards. "Knowledge is the only thing they can't take from you," she would whisper, her voice low and urgent, always listening for footsteps outside that might mean we had been discovered. "Learn everything you can. Remember everything you see. Pay attention to how things work, how people think, how the world operates. Someday it might save your life. Someday it might be the difference between freedom and death." I learned. I absorbed everything she taught me like dry ground absorbing rain. I learned to read and write, though I had to hide this knowledge carefully because literate slaves were considered dangerous, were punished severely if discovered, were sometimes sold away to harsher situations where their education couldn't cause trouble. I learned to observe people, to understand their motivations, to predict their actions based on their words and expressions. I learned to see patterns, to understand systems, to think strategically about problems and solutions. When I was 10 years old, I was apprenticed to the plantation's carpenter, an older enslaved man named Samuel, who had been building and repairing structures for 40 years. Samuel was in his 60s then, his hair completely white, his hands gnarled and scarred from decades of working with wood and tools, but his mind was sharp and his skills were extraordinary. He could look at a piece of timber and know exactly how it would behave, where it would be strong and where it would be weak, how it would age and weather over time. He could design structures that would stand for generations, that would withstand storms and heat and the settling of foundations. He taught me everything he knew: how to measure and cut wood with precision, how to join pieces together using mortise and tenon joints that would hold without nails, how to read the grain of timber and select the right pieces for the right purposes, how to use planes and chisels and saws and all the tools of the carpenter's trade. But he also taught me something more valuable, something that would eventually save my life and my family. He taught me to see buildings not just as structures but as systems, as collections of spaces both visible and hidden, as three-dimensional puzzles that could be understood and manipulated if you knew how they were put together. Every house has secrets, Marcus, Samuel told me one afternoon when I was 12 years old. We were working on repairs to the big house, replacing some rotted floorboards in the parlor, and he had shown me the crawl space underneath where the floor joists were supported on brick piers. Spaces between walls where pipes and wires run, gaps under floors where air circulates to prevent rot, attics and basements and closets that connect in ways people don't think about because they only see the finished surfaces, the painted walls and polished floors. But a good carpenter knows all these spaces, knows how a house breathes and moves and hides things. And if you're smart, you remember every space you create, every passage you build, every hiding place you make, because someday you might need to use them. Why would I need to use them? I asked, not understanding what he meant. He looked at me with eyes that had seen too much suffering, too much injustice, too many people broken by the system we lived under. Because you're a slave, boy. And slaves need hiding places. Slaves need escape routes. Slaves need to know things that their masters don't know, need to have advantages that can't be taken away. You build those advantages into every structure you create, and you remember them. You never know when you might need them. I didn't fully understand what he meant then, but I remembered his words. And over the years, working alongside Samuel and then on my own after he died when I was 18, I learned to see buildings the way he had taught me, as three-dimensional puzzles with visible rooms and invisible spaces, with public areas and secret passages, with places where people lived and places where people never looked. I learned to remember every detail of every structure I worked on. I developed a memory that could recall the exact dimensions of a room I had built 5 years earlier, the precise location of every joist and stud and rafter, the hidden spaces that existed behind walls and under floors and above ceilings. It became second nature to me, this cataloging of spaces, this mental mapping of structures. I didn't even think about it consciously. It was just how my mind worked, how I understood the world. In 1853, when I was 22 years old, Colonel Harrison died, and his estate was liquidated to pay his debts. The plantation was sold, divided up among several buyers. The enslaved people who had worked there, including me and my mother, were sold at auction to various purchasers throughout Georgia and South Carolina. I was purchased by Master Thomas Caldwell, a wealthy merchant in Augusta who had made his fortune in cotton trading and shipping. He paid $800 for me, a high price that reflected my skills as a carpenter and my reputation as a reliable, intelligent worker. My mother was sold to a family in Savannah, and I never saw her again. I heard years later that she had died in 1855, but I was never able to confirm it, never able to visit her grave, never able to say goodbye. That's one of the cruelties of slavery. Families are torn apart without warning, without ceremony, without any consideration for the bonds of love that connect people. You lose someone, and you never get closure, never get to grieve properly, never get to honor their memory the way they deserve. Master Caldwell was 42 years old when he purchased me, a tall man with dark hair going gray at the temples, cold blue eyes that looked at people as if calculating their value in dollars and cents, and a manner that was always formal, always distant, always focused on business and profit. He was married to a woman named Margaret who was 20 years younger than him. She had been 22 when they married. He had been 42. A marriage arranged between wealthy families to consolidate property and social standing, rather than for love or companionship. Margaret Caldwell was beautiful in a cold, brittle way, pale skin, dark hair, sharp features, and eyes that looked at enslaved people with contempt and disgust, as if we were insects that had somehow invaded her perfect world. She was obsessed with social status, with being seen as one of the leading ladies of Augusta society, with hosting elaborate parties and wearing expensive dresses and being envied by other wealthy women. She and Master Caldwell had no children, which seemed to be a source of constant tension between them. I heard them arguing about it sometimes when I was working in the house. She blamed him for their childlessness, he blamed her, and the arguments would escalate into shouting matches that ended with doors slamming and days of cold silence. Master Caldwell had just purchased a large lot on Green Street in the most fashionable part of Augusta, and he wanted to build a mansion that would reflect his wealth and status. That would be the envy of every other wealthy family in the city. That would establish him as one of the most important men in Georgia. He needed skilled carpenters to build this mansion, and I had developed a reputation as one of the best in the region. Young, strong, intelligent, capable of understanding complex architectural plans and executing them with precision. The mansion Master Caldwell envisioned was enormous, 3 stories tall with 20 rooms, built in the Greek Revival style that was fashionable in the 1850s, with tall white columns supporting a portico at the front entrance, wide verandas wrapping around the first and second floors, elaborate moldings and cornices decorating every room, and details that would require hundreds of hours of skilled carpentry work. The plans had been drawn up by an architect from Savannah, a man who designed houses for the wealthiest families in the South, and the estimated cost was $30,000, an astronomical sum that only the richest men could afford. Construction began in the spring of 1853 and continued for 2 full years. I was involved in every aspect of the project, working alongside other carpenters and laborers, both enslaved and free, to transform the architect's drawings into a physical structure. I helped lay the foundation, build the framework of walls and floors and roof, construct the elaborate staircases that connected the 3 floors, create the intricate woodwork that decorated every room, crown moldings, chair rails, wainscoting, window casings, door frames, built-in cabinets and shelves. And as I built, I remembered. I remembered every space I created, every passage I constructed, every gap between walls, every crawl space under floors, every access point to the attic. I remembered it all because Samuel had taught me to remember, because my mother had taught me that knowledge was power, because some deep instinct told me that someday I might need to know these things, might need to use these spaces for purposes that had nothing to do with construction or maintenance. The house had secrets that only I knew, secrets I had built deliberately and carefully, knowing that they might someday be useful. There were spaces between the walls where the chimney flues ran from the fireplaces on each floor up to the roof, spaces that were supposed to be completely filled with brick and mortar, but that I had left partially hollow in certain sections, creating narrow vertical passages that a thin person could squeeze through if they knew where they were and how to access them. There were crawl spaces under the first floor where the foundation was raised on brick piers to allow air circulation and prevent moisture damage, spaces that were supposed to be completely sealed off from the interior of the house, but that I had left accessible through small openings hidden behind baseboards in certain rooms. There was an attic that ran the full length of the house, a large open space under the roof where the rafters and roof boards were exposed, a space that was accessed by a pull-down ladder in the second-floor hallway, but that also had small doors hidden behind moldings in several rooms, doors that could be opened if you knew where to press and how to release the hidden latches I had installed. There were passages between rooms that were supposed to be filled with insulation to deaden sound, but that I had left partially hollow, creating narrow corridors that a person could navigate if they were willing to squeeze through tight spaces and crawl on their hands and knees. I had built these spaces deliberately, subtly, so carefully that no one else knew they existed, not the other carpenters who worked on the house, not the architect who had designed it, not Master Caldwell who paid for it and inspected it regularly during construction. These were my secrets, my insurance policy, my escape routes if I ever needed them. I had built them following Samuel's advice, creating advantages that couldn't be taken away, hiding places that only I knew about. After the house was completed in the spring of 1855, I continued to work for Master Caldwell as his personal carpenter, maintaining the house and building furniture, and doing whatever construction work he needed around the property. I was valuable to him, skilled labor that he owned outright, that cost him nothing beyond basic food and shelter and clothing. That generated profit whenever he rented out my services to other wealthy families in Augusta who needed carpentry work done. I built furniture for parlors and bedrooms, constructed additions to houses, repaired damage from storms and age, and earned Master Caldwell a steady income that he pocketed while giving me nothing beyond the bare minimum needed to keep me alive and working. I had also married by then, though married is perhaps too strong a word for what enslaved people were allowed to have. Her name was Sarah, and she was a house servant who worked for the Henderson family, wealthy merchants who lived 3 streets away from the Caldwell mansion. I had met her at church. Enslaved people were allowed to attend services on Sunday mornings, though we had to sit in a separate section at the back and weren't allowed to participate in communion or other rituals reserved for white people. Sarah was 23 years old when we met, beautiful and strong and intelligent, with a spirit that hadn't been completely broken by years of slavery. We fell in love slowly, carefully, meeting on Sunday afternoons when we both had a few hours of free time, talking about our lives and our dreams and our hopes for a future that seemed impossible, but that we couldn't help imagining anyway. We were married in 1854 in a simple ceremony that had no legal standing. Enslaved people couldn't legally marry in Georgia, couldn't enter into contracts of any kind, because we weren't recognized as people under the law, only as property. But we stood before the other enslaved people in our community, held hands, made promises to each other, and considered ourselves married in the eyes of God, even if not in the eyes of the law. We had 2 children by 1857. Our daughter Grace was born in 1855, a beautiful baby with Sarah's eyes and my stubborn determination. Our son Samuel, named after my teacher and mentor, was born in early 1857, a healthy boy who cried lustily and seemed determined to make his presence known to the world. Sarah and the children lived with the Henderson family, and I lived in the quarters behind the Caldwell mansion with the other enslaved workers, a small cabin I shared with 2 other men, barely large enough for the 3 of us, with a dirt floor and walls that let in the cold in winter and the heat in summer. I saw my family once a week on Sundays when we were allowed a few hours of free time after church services. We would meet in a small park near the river, spread a blanket on the grass, and spend precious hours together, playing with Grace, holding baby Samuel, talking about our week, pretending for a few hours that we were a normal family living a normal life instead of enslaved people whose time together could be ended at any moment by the whim of our owners. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. But it was all we had, and we treasured every moment, knowing how fragile it all was, knowing that we could be separated at any time if our owners decided to sell us or move us, or simply decided that our family connections were inconvenient. And then, in July of 1857, my worst fears began to come true. I was working in the library of the Caldwell mansion, building new bookshelves that Master Caldwell had commissioned to hold his growing collection of books. It was late afternoon on a Thursday, the summer heat oppressive even inside the house, and I was alone in the room, carefully measuring and cutting pieces of walnut wood that would form the shelves and supports. I was focused on my work, my mind occupied with calculations and measurements, when I heard voices in the hallway outside the library. Master Caldwell was talking to someone, a man whose voice I didn't recognize, someone who must have been visiting on business. I continued working, paying no particular attention to their conversation because it wasn't my business, and because enslaved people who listened too carefully to their masters' private conversations often found themselves in serious trouble. But then I heard my name, and I froze, my hand still on the saw, my ears suddenly focused on every word. "The Marcus situation is becoming problematic," Master Caldwell was saying, his voice carrying clearly through the open library door. "He's too valuable to keep here in Augusta doing maintenance work and small projects. I've had an offer from a plantation owner in Mississippi, a man named Thornton who owns 5,000 acres and wants to build a new main house and several outbuildings. He's heard about Marcus's skills and wants to purchase him specifically for this project. He's offering $5,000, which is an extraordinary price for a single slave. I'd be a fool to turn down that kind of money." My heart stopped. My hand started shaking so badly I had to set down the saw before I dropped it. Master Caldwell was planning to sell me. To sell me to Mississippi, hundreds of miles away from Augusta, from Sarah and Grace and Samuel, from everything I knew and everyone I loved. "What about his family?" the other man asked. "Doesn't he have a wife and children here in Augusta?" "He does," Master Caldwell replied, his voice completely indifferent, as if he were discussing livestock rather than human beings, as if the bonds of love and family meant nothing at all. "But they belong to the Hendersons, not to me. I'd be selling Marcus alone, The family would stay here in Augusta. It's unfortunate, but business is business. $5,000 is too much money to turn down just because a slave has family attachments. When would the sale take place? The other man asked. Thornton wants Marcus in Mississippi by September 1st, which gives us about 6 weeks. I'll finalize the paperwork next week and arrange for Marcus to be transported. He doesn't know yet. I'll tell him a few days before he leaves. No point in giving him time to cause trouble or try to run away. They moved away down the hallway, their voices fading, leaving me standing alone in the library with my world collapsing around me. I was going to be sold away from my wife and children, sold to Mississippi, where I would spend the rest of my life building houses for a stranger, where I would never see Sarah's face again, never hold Grace and Samuel, never watch my children grow up, never have another Sunday afternoon with my family. This was the nightmare that haunted every enslaved person who had a family, the constant, gnawing fear of being sold away, of being separated forever from the people you loved, of having your family torn apart because someone decided you were worth more money somewhere else. It happened all the time, happened to families all around us, happened so often that we all lived with the fear of it like a weight pressing down on our chests every moment of every day. I stood there in the library for a long time, maybe 10 minutes, maybe longer, just trying to breathe, trying to think, trying to figure out what I could do. My mind raced through options, each one more impossible than the last. I could run away, try to escape to the north where slavery was illegal, where I might be able to live as a free man. But that would mean leaving Sarah and the children behind, and I couldn't do that. I couldn't abandon my family, couldn't leave them to wonder what had happened to me, couldn't live with the knowledge that they were still enslaved while I was free. I could try to convince Master Caldwell not to sell me, could beg him to reconsider, could promise to work harder or do better or whatever he wanted if he would just let me stay in Augusta near my family. But I knew it would be useless. Master Caldwell didn't care about my feelings or my family. He cared about money, about profit, about the $5,000 he would make from selling me. My pleas would mean nothing to him. I could try to convince the Hendersons to sell Sarah and the children too, so we could all be sold together to Mississippi. But I had no money to make that happen, no way to influence the Hendersons' decision, no power to keep my family together if the owners decided to separate us. Or I could disappear. The idea came to me suddenly, born from years of remembering the spaces I had built, the passages I had created, the secrets the house held that only I knew. I could disappear into the walls of the Caldwell mansion, hide in the spaces that only I knew existed, and wait. Wait for what? I wasn't entirely sure yet. But disappearing would buy me time, would prevent the sale from happening immediately, would give me a chance to think and plan and figure out some way to save my family from being torn apart. It was insane. It was dangerous. It was probably impossible to pull off. But it was the only option I could see that didn't involve either abandoning my family or accepting our separation as inevitable. I spent the rest of that day and all of the next day thinking about the plan, working out the details, figuring out how I could survive hidden in the walls of the house, how I could avoid being discovered, how long I could last before I would have to emerge. I thought about food and water, about sanitation, about the physical discomfort of living in cramped spaces, about the psychological strain of isolation and silence, but most of all, I thought about my family, about Grace's laugh when I tickled her, about Samuel's tiny hands gripping my finger, about Sarah's smile when she saw me on Sunday afternoons, about all the moments we would never have if I was sold to Mississippi. And I decided that any risk, any discomfort, any danger was worth it if there was even a small chance of keeping my family together. If you're watching this story unfold from somewhere in the world, leave a comment telling me where you're from, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. Because what I did next, and what I heard during those 7 days, changed everything. On Saturday night, 2 days after I had overheard Master Caldwell's conversation, I put my plan into action. I worked late in the library, finishing the bookshelves I'd been building, making sure everything was perfect so that Master Caldwell would have no reason to be suspicious or dissatisfied. Then, after everyone in the house had gone to bed and the mansion was dark and silent, I slipped into one of the hidden passages I had built years earlier. The entrance was in the library itself. hidden behind one of the new bookshelves I had just installed. I had built the bookshelf with a false back that could be pushed open if you knew where to press, revealing a narrow opening in the wall behind it. The opening led to a space between the library wall and the exterior wall of the house, a gap about 18 inches wide that ran from the floor to the ceiling. This space was supposed to be completely filled with insulation, but I had left it hollow, creating a vertical passage that connected to other hidden spaces throughout the house. I squeezed through the opening, pulled the false back of the bookshelf closed behind me, and found myself in complete darkness, surrounded by walls on all sides. Standing in a space so narrow I could touch both walls with my elbows. I had a small candle and matches in my pocket, but I didn't dare light it yet. The smell of smoke might give me away, and I needed to move to a safer location before I could risk any light. I felt my way along the passage, moving slowly and carefully, my hands running along the walls to guide me. I knew this space intimately. I had built it, had measured every inch of it, had memorized its dimensions and connections. After about 20 feet, the passage opened into a slightly wider space, where the chimney flue ran up from the first-floor fireplace. Here there was a small platform I had built, just wide enough to sit on, and a narrow ladder that led up to the second floor. I climbed the ladder in darkness, counting the rungs, 12 of them, each one exactly 16 inches apart, until I reached the second floor. Here the passage continued, running behind the walls of the second-floor bedrooms, connecting to the attic through a small door, hidden behind a decorative molding in the hallway ceiling. I made my way to the attic, squeezing through the small door and emerging into a much larger space. The attic ran the full length of the house, about 80 feet long and 30 feet wide, with a peaked roof that was highest in the center and sloped down to about 4 feet high at the edges. It was filled with stored furniture, trunks of old clothes, boxes of papers and books, and various items that the Caldwells had no current use for, but weren't ready to throw away. This would be my home for the next 7 days. I found a spot in the far corner of the attic, behind a stack of old furniture and trunks, where I could hide if anyone came up to the attic during the day. I arranged some old blankets I found in a trunk to create a makeshift bed. I had brought a small bag with me containing a few essential items, a water flask, some dried meat and bread I had saved from my meals over the past few days, a small knife, matches, and a stub of candle. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough. The first night was the hardest. The attic was stifling hot even after the sun went down, the heat of the day trapped under the roof with nowhere to go. I lay on my makeshift bed sweating, uncomfortable, already questioning whether this insane plan could possibly work. I thought about Sarah and the children, wondered what they would think when they heard I had disappeared, wondered if they would understand that I was doing this for them, to try to keep our family together. I must have eventually fallen asleep from exhaustion, because I woke to the sound of voices below me. It was morning, and the household was waking up, starting the day's activities. I could hear footsteps, doors opening and closing, the distant sounds of breakfast being prepared in the kitchen, and then I heard Master Caldwell's voice, loud and angry, shouting for the overseer. "Where is Marcus? He didn't show up for work this morning. Find him immediately." I heard the overseer, a man named Briggs who was responsible for managing the enslaved workers on the Caldwell property, responding, his voice worried and confused. "I don't know, sir. He was in his cabin last night. The other men said he was there when they went to sleep, but this morning his bed was empty. He's just gone." "Gone?" Master Caldwell's voice rose to a shout. "What do you mean, gone? Slaves don't just disappear. Search the property, search the quarters, search everywhere, and if you don't find him in the next hour, get the dogs and start searching the surrounding area. He can't have gotten far." I listened as the household erupted into chaos. I heard people running through the house, opening doors, checking rooms, calling my name. I heard them searching the outbuildings, the stables, the gardens. I heard the dogs being brought out, heard them barking and running around the property, following scent trails that led nowhere because I was inside the house, in a space where my scent was already everywhere from years of working there. Master Caldwell was furious. I could hear him ranting about the money he was going to lose if I wasn't found, about the deal with the Mississippi plantation owner that would fall through, about the inconvenience and embarrassment of having a valuable slave escape. He sent men to search the roads leading out of Augusta, to question other enslaved people about whether they had seen me or helped me escape, to check with slave catchers and patrols throughout the region. But I was nowhere to be found because I was everywhere, invisible in the walls of the house I had built, a ghost haunting the spaces between the visible world and the hidden one. The first day was terrifying. Every sound made me freeze, afraid that I had been discovered, that someone would find the hidden passages and drag me out. I barely moved, barely breathed, just listened to the chaos below me and prayed that my hiding place would hold. By the second day, the initial frenzy had died down somewhat. Master Caldwell had posted a reward for my capture, $100, an enormous sum that would motivate slave catchers throughout Georgia to search for me. Descriptions of me were being circulated: my age, my height, my skills as a carpenter, the clothes I had been wearing when I disappeared. But no one had any idea where I had gone or how I had managed to escape without being seen. I settled into a routine of sorts. During the day, I stayed hidden in my corner of the attic, barely moving, listening to the sounds of the household below me. At night, after everyone had gone to bed, I would venture out into the hidden passages, moving carefully through the spaces between walls, making my way down to the kitchen to steal small amounts of food, bread, cheese, dried meat, whatever I could take without it being obviously missing. I also discovered something I hadn't anticipated. The hidden passages and spaces I had built allowed me to hear conversations throughout the house with remarkable clarity. Sound traveled through the walls in unexpected ways, and by positioning myself in certain locations, I could hear what was being said in the rooms below me, almost as clearly as if I were standing in the room itself. And what I heard over the next several days would change everything. On the third day, I was in a space between the walls of Master Caldwell's study on the first floor and the bedroom above it. It was mid-afternoon, and I heard Master Caldwell enter the study with another man, the same man whose voice I had heard during the conversation about selling me, though I still didn't know his name. "The Marcus situation is unfortunate," the stranger was saying, "but perhaps it's for the best. He knew too much about the house, about the construction, about the modifications we made. If he's run away to the north, he can't tell anyone about what he saw or what he might have figured out." "True," Master Caldwell replied, and I heard the sound of a decanter being opened, liquid being poured into glasses. Though I doubt he understood what those modifications were for. He's just a carpenter after all. He wouldn't have known that the false wall in the basement was designed to hide contraband, or that the modified chimney flue could be used to move goods without being seen from the street. My mind raced. False wall in the basement, modified chimney flue. I had built those things, had followed Master Caldwell's specific instructions about their construction, but I had thought they were just architectural features, design choices that he wanted for aesthetic or practical reasons. I hadn't known they had a specific purpose, hadn't understood what they were for. "The shipment from Charleston arrives next week," the stranger continued. "We'll need to move it quickly through the house and out to the warehouse on the river. With Marcus gone, who will handle any carpentry work if we need to make adjustments to the hiding spaces?" "I'll hire someone else," Master Caldwell said. "Someone who doesn't ask questions and doesn't remember too much. Marcus was too intelligent for his own good. I should have sold him years ago, before he had a chance to learn so much about the house and the business." They continued talking, and I continued listening, and slowly, piece by piece, I began to understand what Master Caldwell was involved in. He was smuggling something. I wasn't sure what yet, but it was illegal, valuable, and dangerous. He was using the house I had built as part of his smuggling operation, using the spaces and passages I had created for purposes I had never imagined. Over the next several days, I heard more conversations, pieced together more of the puzzle. Master Caldwell was involved in illegal slave trading, importing enslaved people from Africa, even though the international slave trade had been banned by federal law in 1808. He was bringing people in through Charleston, moving them through Augusta, using the hidden spaces in his house and selling them to plantations throughout the Deep South at enormous profits. The false wall in the basement that I had built was used to hide people temporarily when they first arrived, keeping them out of sight until they could be moved at night. The modified chimney flue that I had constructed allowed people to be moved from the basement to the second floor without being seen from outside, using a system of pulleys and platforms that I had built without understanding their true purpose. Master Caldwell had partners in this operation, Men in Charleston who arranged the shipments from Africa, men in New Orleans who distributed the enslaved people to buyers, corrupt officials who were paid to look the other way. It was a vast criminal enterprise that generated enormous profits for everyone involved. But that wasn't all I learned. On the fourth day, I heard something that made my blood run cold. I was in the space between the walls of Master Caldwell's study again, listening to a conversation between him and his wife, Margaret. They were arguing about money, about expenses, about the cost of maintaining their lavish lifestyle. Margaret wanted new furniture, new dresses, a trip to Europe. Master Caldwell was telling her they needed to be more careful with money, that the smuggling operation was profitable, but also risky, that they needed to maintain reserves in case something went wrong. And then Master Caldwell said something that made me freeze in horror. "The Henderson situation is resolved," he said, his voice cold and matter-of-fact. "I took care of it last night. He won't be causing us any more problems." "What did you do, Thomas?" Margaret asked, her voice sharp with concern. "What have you done?" "What needed to be done? Henderson discovered what we were doing. One of his servants saw something they shouldn't have seen and told him about it. He came to me demanding money to keep quiet, threatening to expose us to the federal authorities unless we paid him $10,000. I couldn't allow that. So I arranged for him to have an accident. He fell down the stairs in his own house last night, broke his neck. Very tragic. The funeral is tomorrow." I felt like I couldn't breathe. Mr. Henderson was Sarah's master, the man who owned my wife and children, and Master Caldwell had killed him, had murdered him to protect his illegal smuggling operation. "What about his property?" Margaret asked after a long silence. "What happens to his slaves and his house and everything else?" "His estate will be liquidated to pay his debts," Master Caldwell replied. "Everything will be sold at auction next week. The house, the furniture, the slaves. Which means Sarah and the children will be available for purchase. I'm thinking of buying them myself. It would be convenient to have Marcus's family here, assuming he's ever found. And if he's not found, well, I can always sell them for a profit. A young woman and 2 small children should fetch a good price." My wife and children were going to be sold at auction, and Master Caldwell, the man who had murdered their owner, was planning to buy them as if they were furniture or livestock, as if their lives and their suffering meant nothing at all. I spent the rest of that day and all of the next day in a state of shock and rage and despair, trying to process what I had learned, trying to figure out what I could do with this information. Master Caldwell was a murderer and a smuggler, involved in crimes that would send him to prison for life if they were ever exposed. But how could I expose him? I was a slave, a fugitive hiding in the walls of his house. My word would never be believed against his. If I came forward with accusations, I would be punished for making false claims, would be sold away or killed to silence me. But then, on the 6th day, I heard something that gave me an idea, a possibility, a weapon I might be able to use. Master Caldwell was in his study with his partner, the man from Charleston whose name I had learned was Whitfield. They were discussing the upcoming shipment, making plans for how to move the enslaved people through the house and out to the warehouse. "We need to be more careful," Whitfield was saying. "The federal authorities are getting more aggressive about enforcing the ban on slave importation. There have been arrests in Mobile and Savannah. If we're caught, we'll hang. The penalties for slave smuggling are severe." "I know," Master Caldwell said, "which is why we need to maintain absolute secrecy. No one can know what we're doing. No one can have evidence that could be used against us." "What about documentation?" Whitfield asked. "The bills of sale, the shipping manifests, the financial records. If those were ever discovered, they would be enough to convict us." "I keep everything locked in the safe in my study," Master Caldwell replied. "No one has access to it except me. The documents are secure." I listened to this conversation with growing excitement. Documentation, evidence, physical proof of Master Caldwell's crimes that could be used to expose him, to bring him to justice, to destroy him. If I could get access to that safe, if I could steal those documents, I would have a weapon. I would have leverage. I would have the power to force Master Caldwell to give me what I wanted, freedom for myself and my family, in exchange for my silence about his crimes. But how could I get into the safe? I didn't know the combination. I didn't have the skills to crack it open. And even if I could get it open, how would I use the documents without revealing myself as the source? I spent the rest of the 6th day and all of the 7th day thinking about this problem, working through possibilities, trying to figure out a plan that might actually work. And slowly, carefully, a plan began to form in my mind. I couldn't steal the documents myself. That would be too risky, too likely to be discovered. But I didn't need to steal them. I just needed to know what was in them, needed to be able to describe them in enough detail that Master Caldwell would know that someone had seen them, that someone knew his secrets. And I had seen them in a way. I had heard Master Caldwell and Whitfield discussing them, had heard them mention specific names and dates and amounts of money, had heard enough details that I could describe the contents of those documents with reasonable accuracy, even though I had never actually seen them. I could use that knowledge to blackmail Master Caldwell. I could have someone deliver a message to him, someone who couldn't be traced back to me, threatening to expose his crimes unless he agreed to certain terms. And those terms would be simple. Freedom papers for me, Sarah, Grace, and Samuel, along with enough money to start a new life in the North. It was risky. It was dangerous. If Master Caldwell figured out that I was the source of the blackmail, he would kill me without hesitation. But it was the only plan I could think of that had any chance of success, the only way I could see to save my family from being torn apart. On the 7th night, I decided it was time to emerge from hiding. I had been gone for a week, long enough that everyone would assume I had successfully escaped, that I was miles away by now, probably heading north toward freedom. My sudden reappearance would be shocking and confusing, but I had a story prepared, a plausible explanation for where I had been. After everyone in the house had gone to bed, I made my way through the hidden passages one last time, moving from the attic down to the 1st floor, squeezing through the narrow spaces between walls, crawling through the crawl space under the floor. I emerged in the basement, through a small opening behind some stored furniture, then made my way to a window that I had left unlocked days earlier. I climbed out of the window, leaving the basement and the house behind, and walked into the woods behind the property. I deliberately left clear tracks in the soft earth, tracks that would be easy to follow, tracks that would support my story of having been lost in the woods. Then I circled around toward the main road, making sure I was visible to anyone who might be watching, making my way back toward the Caldwell property from a different direction. The next morning I walked up to the front gate of the Caldwell property, dirty and exhausted, and looking like I had been wandering in the woods for a week. I was wearing the same clothes I had disappeared in, now torn and stained with dirt and leaves. My face was covered with a week's growth of beard. I looked exactly like a slave who had gotten lost and had finally found his way back. The overseer Briggs saw me first. His eyes went wide with shock, and he immediately called for Master Caldwell. "Marcus!" Master Caldwell shouted when he saw me, his face turning red with anger. "Where the hell have you been? Do you have any idea how much trouble you've caused? How much money I've lost because of your disappearance?" I kept my voice humble, my eyes downcast, playing the role of a simple slave who had made a foolish mistake. "I'm sorry, Master. I got lost. I went into the woods behind the property to gather some wood for a project and I got turned around. I couldn't find my way back. I've been wandering for days, trying to find the road, trying to get back home. I'm so sorry, Master. I didn't mean to cause trouble." It was a weak story, barely plausible. Anyone who thought about it carefully would realize that it didn't make much sense. How could someone get so lost that they couldn't find their way back for a week, especially someone who knew the area well? But Master Caldwell seemed to accept it, or at least he didn't question it too closely. He was so relieved to have me back, his valuable property, his skilled carpenter who was worth $5,000, that he didn't want to examine the story too carefully. He had me whipped as punishment for running away, 10 lashes delivered by Briggs while Master Caldwell watched, 10 lashes that I endured without crying out, biting down on a piece of leather to keep from screaming. The pain was intense, the whip cutting into my back, but I had expected it, had prepared myself for it. It was a small price to pay for what I had learned, for the weapon I now possessed. After the whipping, Master Caldwell sent me back to work as if nothing had happened, as if the past week had been just a minor inconvenience rather than a life-changing experience. But everything had changed. I had information now, knowledge that gave me power, secrets that could destroy Master Caldwell if they were revealed. I just needed to figure out how to use that power without getting myself killed in the process. The opportunity came 2 days later. There was a free black man in Augusta named Isaiah who worked as a barber, cutting hair for both white and black customers in a small shop on Broad Street. Isaiah was known in the enslaved community as someone who could be trusted, someone who had connections to the abolitionist movement, someone who sometimes helped enslaved people escape to the north through the Underground Railroad. He was careful and discreet, never speaking openly about his activities, but those of us who paid attention knew that he was someone who might help if approached correctly. I managed to get a message to Isaiah through another enslaved person who worked in town, a man named Jacob, who delivered goods to various businesses and who could pass messages without arousing suspicion. The message was simple. I need to speak with you urgently about a matter that could help many people. Please meet me on Sunday afternoon near the river. Isaiah agreed to meet me. On Sunday, during the few hours of free time I was allowed after church services, I made my way to a secluded spot near the Savannah River, where we could talk without being overheard or observed. Isaiah was waiting for me when I arrived, sitting on a fallen log, his eyes watchful and cautious. He was about 40 years old, a tall man with graying hair and intelligent eyes that had seen too much suffering and injustice. "What do you need, Marcus?" he asked quietly. "Your message said it was urgent." I sat down beside him and told him everything. I told him about overhearing Master Caldwell's plan to sell me to Mississippi, about my decision to disappear into the walls of the house, about the 7 days I had spent hiding and listening. I told him about Master Caldwell's illegal slave smuggling operation, about the murder of Mr. Henderson, about all the crimes and secrets I had learned. "I need you to deliver a message to Master Caldwell," I said when I had finished my story. "A message that he'll understand came from someone who knows his secrets, but that can't be traced back to me directly. I need you to tell him that someone has evidence of his crimes, evidence that will be delivered to the federal authorities unless he agrees to certain terms." "What terms?" Isaiah asked, his expression serious. "Freedom papers for me, my wife Sarah, and our 2 children Grace and Samuel. Legal manumission documents that will allow us to leave Georgia and travel north without being captured as runaways, and $500 in cash to help us start a new life. In exchange, the person who knows his secrets will remain silent forever, will never reveal what they know to anyone." Isaiah looked at me with a mixture of admiration and deep concern. "This is extraordinarily dangerous, Marcus. If Caldwell figures out that you're the source of this blackmail, he'll kill you without hesitation. He's already killed once to protect his secrets. He won't hesitate to kill again." "I know," I said, "but I don't have any other options. He was planning to sell me to Mississippi before I disappeared. Now that Mr. Henderson is dead and his estate is being liquidated, Master Caldwell will probably buy my wife and children at the auction just to have leverage over me. If I don't act now, my family will be completely under his control, and I'll never have another chance to free us. This is the only way." Isaiah nodded slowly, understanding the impossible situation I was in. "I'll deliver your message, but you need to be very careful. Stay visible, stay busy, act like nothing has changed. Don't give Caldwell any reason to suspect that you're the source of this information. Can you do that?" "Yes," I said. "I've been doing it for 2 days already. I can keep doing it." "Good." He stood up, preparing to leave. "Come back here next Sunday at the same time. I'll leave a message for you hidden under that rock over there." He pointed to a large flat stone near the water's edge, telling you what happened and what you need to do next. "If anyone asks why you're coming to this spot, say you like to fish here on Sunday afternoons. Bring a fishing pole to make it believable." 3 days later, Isaiah delivered the message to Master Caldwell. He did it cleverly and carefully, leaving an anonymous letter at Master Caldwell's office in town, a letter that detailed specific information about the illegal slave smuggling operation, information that only someone with inside knowledge could have known. The letter said, "I know about the shipments from Charleston. I know about the false wall in the basement and the modified chimney flue. I know about your partners Whitfield and Morrison. I know about the bribes you pay to customs officials. I know about what happened to Mr. Henderson. I have documented evidence of all of this. and I will take it to the federal authorities unless you agree to my terms. You will prepare legal manumission papers for Marcus, Sarah, Grace, and Samuel. You will provide them with $500 in cash. You will allow them to leave Georgia without interference. If you agree to these terms, hang a white cloth from your study window tomorrow morning. If you refuse, the evidence will be delivered to the authorities within 24 hours, and you will hang for murder and slave smuggling. Master Caldwell received the letter, and I watched from a distance as his face went pale, as his hands shook while reading it, as he realized that someone knew his secrets and was willing to expose him unless he complied with their demands. He spent the rest of that day in his study, pacing, thinking, probably trying to figure out who had sent the letter and how they had obtained such detailed information about his illegal activities. He questioned his business partners, his household staff, anyone who might have had access to information about his smuggling operation, but he never suspected me. I was just a carpenter, just a slave who had gotten lost in the woods for a week and come back. I couldn't possibly have the intelligence or the resources to blackmail him. I couldn't possibly know about his crimes or have the courage to threaten him. The next morning, a white cloth hung from Master Caldwell's study window. He had agreed to the terms. Over the next week, Master Caldwell worked with a lawyer to prepare the manumission papers, documents that legally freed me, Sarah, Grace, and Samuel from slavery. It must have been agonizing for him, must have filled him with rage and humiliation to be forced to free valuable property, to lose thousands of dollars in human capital, to be outmaneuvered by someone he couldn't identify or punish. He also attended the auction of Mr. Henderson's estate and purchased Sarah and the children, paying market price for them, about $1,200 for all three. Then, as agreed in the blackmail letter, he freed them along with me, signing all the legal documents that declared we were no longer enslaved, that we had the right to travel freely throughout the United States, that we were legally free people with all the rights and protections that came with that status. He gave me the $500 in cash, his face twisted with barely controlled fury, his eyes promising murder if he ever discovered that I was the one who had blackmailed him, if he ever found proof that I was responsible for forcing him to free us. "You're free to go," he said, his voice tight with rage. "Take your family and leave Georgia immediately. If I ever see you again, if you ever come back to Augusta, if you ever speak about anything you might have seen or heard while you were my property, I will find a way to destroy you. Do you understand me?" "Yes, Master," I said, keeping my voice humble and grateful, still playing the role of a simple slave even though I was now legally free. "Thank you, Master. Thank you for your kindness. We'll leave right away and never trouble you again." And we did. That same day I went to the house where Sarah and the children were staying, showed them the freedom papers that made us all legally free, told them we were leaving immediately for the north. Sarah cried when she saw the papers, couldn't believe that we were actually free, that we could be together as a family without fear of being separated. We packed what few possessions we had, some clothes, a few personal items, the $500 that would allow us to start a new life. And that evening, we boarded a train heading north, leaving Augusta and Georgia and the South behind, heading toward a future that we had never dared to imagine was possible. We traveled through South Carolina and North Carolina and Virginia, always moving, always watching for slave catchers who might not believe our freedom papers or who might try to kidnap us and sell us back into slavery despite our legal status. But we made it safely to Pennsylvania, to Philadelphia, to a city where slavery was illegal and where we could truly be free without fear. I found work as a carpenter in Philadelphia, using the skills Samuel had taught me so many years ago. I built houses and furniture, earned honest wages for honest work, provided for my family in ways I had never been able to do when we were enslaved. Sarah found work as a seamstress, her skilled hands creating beautiful clothes for wealthy families. Grace and Samuel grew up free, attended school, learned to read and write without fear of punishment, had opportunities that would have been impossible if we had remained in slavery. We never went back to Georgia. We never contacted Master Caldwell or anyone associated with him. We simply disappeared into our new lives, becoming part of the free black community in Philadelphia, building a future for ourselves and our children. I often wondered what happened to Master Caldwell after we left. Did he continue his illegal slave smuggling operation? Did he ever discover that I was the one who had blackmailed him? Did he live in constant fear that his secrets would be exposed? Years later, in 1862, I heard through the network of former slaves who had escaped to the north that Master Caldwell's business had collapsed during the early days of the Civil War, that he had been investigated by federal authorities for illegal activities, that he had died in 1863 in debt and disgrace. I never learned the full details, never knew if his crimes were ever fully exposed, or if he took his secrets to the grave, and I didn't care. He had taken so much from me, my freedom, my labor, years of my life that I could never get back. But in the end, I had taken something from him too. I had taken my family's freedom, had forced him to give us what he never would have given willingly, had used his own crimes against him to buy our liberation. The house I had built became my weapon. The spaces I had created became my hiding place and my listening post. The secrets I had learned became my leverage. And the knowledge my mother had insisted I acquire, the ability to read and write and think strategically, became the tool that saved my family. This is my story. The story of how I disappeared into the walls of a mansion for 7 days and emerged with the power to destroy the man who thought he owned me. The story of how hiding and listening and learning gave me the weapon I needed to win my family's freedom. The story of how a carpenter's knowledge of hidden spaces became the key to escaping slavery. And it all started because Samuel had taught me that every house has secrets, and that if you're smart enough and brave enough and desperate enough, you can use those secrets to change your life and save the people you love. Marcus lived in Philadelphia until his death in 1889, at the age of 58. He built a successful carpentry business and became a respected member of the free black community, known for his skill and his integrity. He and Sarah had 3 more children after they arrived in Philadelphia, all born free. He helped other escaped slaves settle in the city, providing them with work and housing and support as they built new lives. He never returned to Georgia and never learned the full details of what happened to Master Caldwell, though he heard rumors that Caldwell's business collapsed and that he died in disgrace. Marcus was buried in Eden Cemetery in Philadelphia, his grave marked with a stone that reads Marcus Freeman, 1831-1889. He built houses and he built freedom. He saw what others missed and used knowledge as his weapon. A loving husband, father and friend who never forgot where he came from. His story became legend in the abolitionist community, told as an example of how intelligence, courage, and strategic thinking could overcome even the most oppressive circumstances. Marcus's story reminds us that resistance during slavery took many forms, that intelligence and knowledge could be as powerful as physical strength, and that sometimes the most effective weapon is information used strategically. His ability to see the hidden spaces in the house he built, to use those spaces to gather information about his master's crimes, and to leverage that information to win his family's freedom, shows us that power comes in many forms, and that even the most powerless people can find ways to fight back. If stories like this resonate with you, subscribe to this channel for more narratives about people who used their intelligence and courage to overcome oppression. These stories matter because they show us that every person has the capacity for resistance, that knowledge truly is power, and that even in the darkest circumstances, there are ways to fight back and win. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts on Marcus's journey.